The funeral hall was dead silent as the pastor read my mother's final eulogy, until my phone blared through the speakers connected to the chapel's Bluetooth. I scrambled to decline it, but my thumb hit speakerphone instead. My husband's furious voice roared through the sanctuary. "I don't care that your mother is in a casket. You put me before your mother. Come to my family gathering in an hour or don't bother coming home." 50 grieving relatives froze in pure shock. I stood there, face burning, paralyzed by the sheer cruelty. But my father didn't yell. He slowly walked up to the podium, picked up the phone, and said in a terrifyingly calm voice, "Let's give him exactly what he wants." My husband thought he was asserting ultimate dominance over a grieving family, but he had no idea he had just triggered his own swift financial and legal execution. My name is Claire, and at 32 years old, I learned how fast a marriage can turn into a nightmare. For 3 years, I believed Mark was my partner, but his overbearing mother had quietly poisoned his mind, convincing him that my devotion belonged entirely to his family. They systematically tried to isolate me from my own flesh and blood, treating my quiet nature as weakness. But the absolute breaking point arrived on the rain-slicked Tuesday afternoon of my mother's funeral. The chapel was suffocatingly quiet as the pastor stepped up to read the final eulogy. I sat in the front row, holding my father's trembling, weathered hand, our grief heavy enough to crush the air from the room. Suddenly, a sharp chime shattered the sacred silence. My phone, which had automatically synced to the sanctuary's Bluetooth audio system for the memorial slideshow, began to ring. Horrified, I scrambled to grab my bag to decline the call, but my shaking thumb accidentally swiped the wrong icon, hitting speakerphone. Mark's furious, arrogant voice instantly boomed through the chapel speakers, echoing off the high stained glass windows for every single guest to hear. "I don't care that your mother is in a casket. You put me before your mother. Come to my family gathering in an hour or don't bother coming home." 50 grieving relatives froze in dead, paralyzed shock. The air burned in my chest, my face flushing with an overwhelming wave of public humiliation as my mother-in-law's laugh echoed faintly in the background of the call. I sat frozen, expecting my world to crumble. But then, my father did something that sent a chill through my spine. He didn't scream, and he didn't shed a single tear. He slowly stood up from the pew, walked up to the podium with absolute, clinical composure, and picked up the phone. Looking directly into the speaker, my dad said in a terrifyingly calm voice, "Let's give him exactly what he wants." He ended the call, turned to me, and offered a faint, icy nod. Behind his quiet eyes lay a hidden truth Mark had completely forgotten: the master corporate estate trust my mother and father had established years ago. Mark thought he was asserting ultimate dominance over a broken family, but he had just signed his own financial death warrant. Following the sudden disconnect of that horrific call, a strange, freezing clarity replaced my panic. My father quietly gestured for the pastor to continue, and we finished my mother's service with unwavering dignity. But the second the black limousines cleared the cemetery gates, Mark's psychological games escalated into total warfare. When I arrived at our suburban home later that evening to collect a fresh set of clothes, the front deadbolt was already engaged. Mark opened the door just a few inches, holding a smug, victorious grin. Beside him stood his mother, sipping tea from my mother's vintage porcelain cups. "You made your choice, Claire," Mark declared, his tone dripping with patronizing arrogance. "You humiliated my family by ignoring my summons today. Until you apologize to my mother on your knees and hand over full management of your family's estate accounts to me, you can sleep in your car." His mother let out a sharp, mocking chuckle, adding, "A disobedient wife needs to learn where her bread is buttered, darling." They truly believed they held all the cards. In Mark's delusional mind, he was the sole financial provider, the high-earning corporate executive who owned the very roof over my head. He assumed that as a grieving, unemployed graphic designer, I would fall apart, beg for his forgiveness, and surrender whatever inheritance my mother had left behind. What Mark and his mother failed to comprehend was the massive double-blind reality governing our entire lives. Mark's swift corporate promotions, his luxury company sedan, and even the initial down payment on our primary residence hadn't come from his sheer talent. They were funded through a private commercial holdings agreement set up by my father's logistics firm 5 years ago. Because my father wanted to protect my future, he had quietly structured Mark's business ventures under a conditional executive contract, placing every major asset into my family's private corporate trust while making Mark a mere authorized manager. Instead of screaming, crying, or revealing my hand, I put on the greatest performance of my life. I let my shoulders slump, forced tears into my eyes, and looked at Mark with feigned submission. "I understand, Mark," I whispered, keeping my voice trembling. "I'll give you time to cool down. I'll see you at your family celebration on Friday." Mark smirked, thoroughly convinced he had broken my spirit, completely oblivious to the fact that his 72-hour timer to absolute ruin had just begun. While Mark spent the next 3 days bragging to his colleagues about how he had brought his grieving wife to her knees, my father and I moved with absolute, surgical precision. We didn't waste a single second weeping in dark rooms. Instead, we turned my father's quiet study into a war room, mobilizing our corporate legal team and a trusted forensic accountant to conduct a deep, relentless audit of every joint account and business ledger connected to Mark's name. As the financial analyst systematically pulled back the layers of Mark's personal transactions, the true extent of his arrogance left us stunned. Mark hadn't just been waiting for my mother to pass away so he could inherit her legacy, he had been actively plotting to liquidate it for months. Driven by pure hubris and his mother's insatiable appetite for high society validation, Mark had committed a series of catastrophic legal blunders that laid the trap for his own destruction. Behind my back, Mark had forged my signature on a series of commercial loan applications, attempting to leverage my father's primary warehouse properties to secure a massive $2 million credit line. He had used the initial cash advance to buy his mother a brand new luxury sports car, clear her mountain of personal credit card debt, and fund an extravagant Friday night family banquet at the city's most exclusive country club. He genuinely believed that my grief would blind me, assuming I would sign the final corporate liability waivers out of sheer exhaustion without ever reading the fine print. What Mark failed to realize in his desperate rush to play the wealthy mogul was that every commercial asset he attempted to pledge was bound to the strict governance clauses of my family's master trust. According to the foundational bylaws my grandfather had drafted decades ago, any unauthorized attempt to encumber trust assets or execute forged guarantees triggered an immediate, automatic revocation of executive privileges, an instant freeze on all affiliated operating accounts, and a mandatory recall of all corporate loans. Sitting across from my father as the forensic team printed out the undeniable paper trail, I looked at the certified fraud reports and smiled. Mark believed Friday night's dinner at the country club was going to be his grand victory celebration, where he would publicly parade his compliant, defeated wife. He had no idea that my father and I were bringing a black leather binder containing the absolute destruction of his life. Friday night arrived, and the grand banquet room at the country club was filled with the sounds of clinking champagne flutes and laughter. Mark sat at the head of the long dining table, flanked by his mother and 20 of his relatives, boasting loudly about his corporate brilliance. He had even set an empty chair beside him, deliberately letting everyone know it was reserved for his humbled wife who was coming to apologize. The heavy double doors of the banquet hall swung open. The room fell into an abrupt hush as my father and I stepped inside, dressed impeccably in tailored dark suits. I carried myself with an undeniable authority, holding a single black leather binder against my chest. Mark's mother let out a loud, mocking laugh, gesturing toward the empty chair. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she sneered. "I hope you brought your apology, Claire." Mark smirked, leaning back in his chair with insufferable triumph. "Sit down, Claire," he commanded loudly for his relatives to hear. "And hand over those estate documents so we can put this behind us." I didn't sit down. My father stepped forward, setting a portable Bluetooth speaker directly onto the white tablecloth. Before Mark could react, my father pressed play. The quiet banquet room was suddenly filled with the loud, unmistakable audio of Mark's phone call from the funeral, echoing crystal clear across the room. "I don't care that your mother is in a casket. You put me before your mother." Gasps rippled through his extended family as the room went deathly silent. Mark's smirk completely vanished, his face flushing a deep, violent crimson. Before he could speak, I opened the black leather binder and slid a stack of formal legal notices directly across the table, right over his plate. "This isn't an apology, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold blade. "That recording has officially been logged with our legal department as a violation of your corporate executive morality clause. And these documents are formal notices of immediate termination and asset seizure." Mark's mother snatched the top page, her eyes scanning down the certified forensic audit reports. "What is this nonsense, she shrieked. You can't do this. Read the fine print, my father said calmly. Because of Mark's forged loan applications and unauthorized corporate spending, every account affiliated with his position has been frozen as of 5 p.m. today. The luxury sedan parked outside has been reported for immediate corporate repossession, and the lease on your primary residence, which is owned entirely by my trust, is terminated. You have 24 hours to clear your personal belongings out of my property. The entire banquet room erupted into chaotic panic. Mark's mother turned ghostly pale, clutching her chest as her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. Mark bolted out of his chair, his hands shaking violently as he tried to call his bank, only to find his cards declined and his corporate access completely revoked. The high society facade he had spent years manufacturing dissolved into pure, pathetic desperation in front of his entire family. Within weeks, the legal dominoes fell with brutal speed. Thanks to the overwhelming forensic evidence of forgery and corporate fraud, our divorce was finalized swiftly and clinical. Mark was stripped of his executive title and forced to surrender every asset he had fraudulently acquired. To avoid active criminal prosecution, he was forced to liquidate his remaining personal savings to pay back the heavy debts he had incurred. Today, he lives in a dingy, one-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the city, working a grueling entry-level sales job just to keep up with his compounding legal liabilities. His mother was forced to sell her prized possessions, her social standing permanently ruined among her country club peers. As for me, sitting on the quiet porch of my father's home with the ocean breeze in the air, I finally feel a profound sense of peace. Standing up to Mark didn't just protect my family's legacy, it gave me the strength to realize my true worth and honor my mother's real memory. Now, I'm curious about all of you who listened to my story today. What would you have done if your spouse treated your family with that level of disrespect during a time of grief? Would you have confronted him publicly or let the legal team handle it silently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to tell me which city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Thank you for watching.